The earth was so flooded that after God stopped all the water flowing from up and down, it took 7 months for the ark to find a landing. 10 months later, and only the tips of the mountains were visible. 40 days later, Noah dared to crack open the window of the ark to look out. The water had been steadily going down, but after many months, there was still water everywhere. So much so they couldn't get out. So he took a raven and let it out. The poor thing was done being locked in, so he just kept hovering and didn't come back. After a while, he let out a dove. He went out but couldn't stay out because there was no landing place for its feet, so it returned to the only place of rest it has known all these months. Often, we feel trapped where we are, but unknown to us, we do not realize that we are being preserved from what is taking out others. In the season of hiding, some of us can't wait to get out, and when the window of opportunity cracks open, we fly out to catch up on all we think we may have missed. Then suddenly, we realize there's no rest for us in the very places we have been itching to move to. Our peace for that season is in the very place where we are sheltered. We are mobile beings, but all of us are not like ravens that can stay out there and survive anyhow. For some of us, our rest is in returning to the very place of shelter, which may appear boring and sometimes tiring until that season is past. The dove returned when it found no rest out there, and Noah took it back into the ark. 7 days later, he let out the dove again, and this time it didn't hurry back, which means things had changed from what it was the last time it was out. There were places it could land and rest, but that was only for a while. Still, that was a good sign compared to the first trip. In the evening, the dove returned with a message of peace that assured Noah that their time of being locked in was at its end. The earth was almost ready to welcome them, and so they began to prepare their hearts for exit from the ark and entry into the new world. After 7 days, he let out the dove again, and its non-return was the final message that all was well and ready to receive them. Yet, it was recorded that Noah didn't fling open the door and they all jumped out. He had every assurance that the new earth was ready for them. Yet, Noah waited. Why? He understood that God started this thing. It was best to let him finish it. They were shut in by God. It was also best to allow God to let them out. They entered at his word. Better to exit also at his word. Some of us are in too much of a hurry. We can't wait to get out. At the slightest sign, we rush out because we feel we have waited too long. We have wasted time. We can't wait to jump back in. Forgetting that every moment spent where God has placed us is never wasted. With God, we don't waste time when we wait. We are prepared in waiting, ready to exit and equipped to enter into what is to come. No time or resource spent at God's instruction is ever wasted. And nothing is better than when we let God order our steps instead of jumping out on our own. If God began anything in your life, can you let him finish it up? In my younger days, I used to run ahead of God. Once God gives me a word, I work out the strategy and the timeline, jump out, and take God with me. God allowed me for a while, and then he had to put a stop to that nonsense. I was baffled. I expected him to be happy that I was willing to jump into whatever he calls me to. That I work out the plan and give it my best. What have I done wrong? I was puzzled. until I understood that God is not looking for experts who know how to get things done. He is seeking partners with whom he can get things done. God is not seeking for those who will lead him along on his own projects. No, no, no. He is seeking for those who recognize his authority and respect his leadership, enough to let him open the door before they step in, and to let him shut that door whenever he pleases, and they will not take offense. God is not looking for leaders. He is seeking for followers who will plant their feet in his steps and do just as he does. Jesus said, I do what the Father does. Any wonder he was God's beloved? God is not after those who know how to get the job done perfectly. No, he is pursuing those who may not know how, but are willing to learn and to work hand in hand with him to bring his will to pass. Those who will answer the call, though the timing may seem odd. Those who will submit when his will makes no sense. Those who will follow through his way, though his way appears like it's bound to fail. Those who will not walk by sight, but will put on their faith and just follow wherever God leads and do whatever he asks. It was a hard lesson for me at the time, but a lesson well learned and so worth the price. That's why I was able to recognize that in Noah's life and how I admired that man, whom we don't know how much he knew of the world and ark and flood affairs, but he knew how to partner with God to pull off such an unforgettable venture. Noah knew how to listen. He got the detail for the ark. He knew how to follow instructions. The ark stood the test of the flood, and he knew how to wait on God, not falling for popular opinions and seemingly convincing appearances. At this time, Noah saw all the signs that the earth was dry and ready to receive them, but he continued in obedience to God. He waited for the one who called him into the ark to call them out. God does not disappoint. His timing is always perfect. The God who called Noah and his family and all the other living creatures into the ark did not forget them in there for a second longer than they should have been there. He shows up on time, always on time. God showed up again and called them out at the perfect time. At his word, Noah stepped out. What a man who will do nothing except at his word. Oh, that we would be like Noah, going and coming at his word, waiting until we hear his clear instructions before we make our moves. Some of us are in trouble because we jump ahead of God. We start out so well, but impatience pushes us ahead of God. And before we realize it, we are stuck. Father, wasting the time we were trying to save. May God give us a heart like Noah's, a heart that will move only at his word. God is not going to abandon you there after he told you to start. He won't leave you halfway, forgotten. No, that is not his character. Whatever he starts, he finishes good. Get your journal. In what area of your life have you been waiting for God? So much so that it's beginning to feel like you are wasting time instead of waiting on God. Let Noah's story remind us that even though times come and times go, God never forgets us. He's always mindful of us. It means that his mind is full of us. He carries us in his heart all the time. He watches over us. He's always thinking about us. And the fact that nothing may seem to be happening for us does not mean that God has forgotten us. Let Noah's story remind us that Even though times come and times go, God never forgets us. He is always mindful of us. It means that his mind is always full of us. He carries us in his heart all the time. He watches over us. He's always thinking about us. And the fact that nothing may seem to be happening for us does not mean that God has forgotten us. Noah knew that without question. May we know that also without any shadow of doubt. Notice the first thing Noah did after they all got out of the ark. He worshipped. He didn't come out angry and bitter for being shut down for so long when he did nothing wrong, locked up with all those stinky animals and unable to go to his favorite places and do his cherished activities. After all, God could find ways to expel whoever and whatever he needed to get rid of without robbing this righteous man who had done no wrong and his family of their freedom. But his ways are not our ways. His ways are always the best if we will trust and obey him. Noah fully recognized not only the sovereignty of God, but also his compassion and mercy toward him and his family. The first thing he wanted to do once he got into the new beginning was to worship God. I learned this many years ago from Noah, and he has been one of the systems of my life's operation. Every time God gives me a word or fulfills a promise, I go into my closet, build an altar, and worship him first before I make that call or step out to tell anyone else. I celebrate every victory first with God, and others come later. When God smelled the aroma of Noah's worship, his heart lifted. Our worship does something to the heart of the Almighty. You have no idea how the worship of mortals like you and me moves the Most High God. I know of nothing that undoes the heart of the Alpha and Omega like sincere worship, rising up from hearts that are laid down as living sacrifices before the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Worship from hearts that may be battered and broken, yet overflowing with gratitude for his greatness and goodness. Worship that may be mingled with tears of pain and fears for tomorrow, and yet unhindered as he lays it all down to honor the God who was and is and who forevermore will be. If only we knew the power of our worship, we will make the most of this weapon of adoration, offense, and defense. Worship is the best sacrifice and gift we can bring to God, and the best weapon there was, there is, and there ever will be. When God saw the smoke of Noah's worship rising into his throne room, when he inhaled the smell of that sincere and spontaneous sacrifice that he did not ask for, God beat his chest and said to himself, not even to Noah, no more. I know humanity will always have tendencies for evil, but never again will I wipe out every living thing like I just did. God established a covenant of peace, progress, and plenty, not just for Noah, but one that stands through all generations, no matter what man does or does not do in the future. Noah's worship had that power in God. Can you imagine how much power and what blessed assurance we can secure, not just for ourselves, but for our families and generations, simply by our heartfelt worship of the Most High God? What do you do whenever God gives you a word, fulfills a promise, or does something remarkable for you or your loved ones? How can you make the most of worship? Not to get anything from God. Noah wasn't looking to get anything out of that. And God cannot be deceived. He knows our hearts and sees our motives, so we can hide our greed and selfishness behind worship. You know, God is not seeking for preachers and teachers and whatever titles we call them. He is seeking for worshipers, sincere worshipers who know how to worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Remember what Jesus told the woman at the well in John chapter 4? True worshipers worship the Father in spirit and in truth, because God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. Those are the ones the Father is seeking, even till today, and he does not joke with them whenever he finds one. Will you be a true worshiper of the Father today? That is the key to a thriving life and walk with God. Check out the links and scriptures below for additional help. Feel free to share your thoughts and answers in the comments. Be inspired. You are a star, and it's your time to shine. Don't forget to subscribe and share this with family and friends. Jump in and join me in the next video still on this series of New Beginning as we see how good people do stupid stuff.